Ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning. I welcome you to the second day and at the fourth session of the Military History Seminar 2020. The JNK Ops of 1947-48, New Perspectives. In the fourth session of MHS 2020, Major General Jagatbir Singh will moderate a session titled The JNK Ops of 1947-48, New Perspectives. The general is from the Doon School and graduated from St. Stephen's College. A second generation officer, he was commissioned into 18 Cavalry in December 1981, a regiment that he subsequently commanded. He has served in various appointments that include a tenure as an instructor at the Indian Military Academy and also the prestigious Defence Services Staff College in Wellington. He commanded an armoured brigade and then the famed 1 Armoured Division. He retired in February 2018. Ladies and gentlemen, over to General Jagatbir Singh, who is the moderator for this morning's session. Sir, I request you to take over.
Good morning, and thank you very much for your introduction. Once again, it's a pleasure being with all young students today, and there are 33 schools over here. It actually really cheers one up to see the enthusiasm of young students and the questions they ask. It is really a pleasure to be with all of you, and I thank Welham Boys School for this wonderful initiative and the chairman, Mr. Darshan Singh, for organizing it. Today, we are going to be speaking about J&K operations, the perspective from 1947-48. Now, if you look at the map of Jammu and Kashmir, if you look at the map of Jammu and Kashmir, you can see that Jammu and Kashmir is almost on the head of India. It has a commanding position. Pre-partition, this area used to overlook what was Tibet and Afghanistan and parts of Russia. But post-partition, this is almost like a nuclear tri-junction overlooking Pakistan and China. So it's got immense geostrategic importance. Now, all of you are well aware of the issues that happened in 1947. India gained independence on 15th August 1947. So there was a wave of nationalism all over India prior to that. However, the nationalism in the valley was directed against the Maharaja and not the British. The Maharaja was, I don't think he ever woke up to the realities of India and Pakistan. He never accepted these realities, and he tried to push for what he called a standstill agreement. So between the period of 15th August 1947 to 26th October 1947, when he signed the Treaty of Accession, You had various events unfolding in Jammu and Kashmir, which included the Prime Minister of Jammu and Kashmir, Mr. Kak, leaning towards Pakistan, having to be removed, the army chief having to be removed, and the chief of police having to be removed, and a standstill agreement being signed between them and Pakistan. Now, to take us through all these events, we have a very, very distinguished and very well-informed panel consisting of Colonel Ajay Raina, Brigadier Rajinder Singh, and Mr. Pankaj Singh. A word about all of them. Ajay was commissioned in December 90. He was commissioned into 93 Field Regiment and got a Sena Medal while serving with 6 Rashtriya Rifles. He has written 10 books, including the latest called In the Nick of Time. He is also a motorcycle enthusiast, and his name is in the Limca Book of Records for going across Ladakh with his wife, him, and a small child. Next, we have Brigadier Rajendra, who was commissioned in December 1977 into the Garhwal Rifle, and he commanded a Garhwal Scouts battalion. He is also an avid mountaineer and was director of the Project Everest, where 2 army expeditions went to Mount Everest. And he has also written numerous books and commanded an infantry brigade on the western sector. And finally, we have Pankaj P. Singh, a software engineer, but turned entrepreneur, who runs one of the best bookshops I've visited in Chandigarh called The Browser. And he and his wife run that. And he has also published many books, his latest being on Brigadier Pritam Singh, Sher Ka Bacha. With this now, I ask Ajay to please tell us what is the significance of the standstill agreement.
And good morning to everyone. Sir, standstill agreement was a document which came into being on 3rd of June 1947. That was just after Indian Independence Act was passed by British Parliament in London. And with a state like J&K, which shared borders with two upcoming nations, and with the kind of demography they had, it was thought proper to have a clause added to the Independence Act as a kind of annexure, wherein British government in India, their political department, Congress Party and Muslim League sat together and they devised a document called Standstill Agreement. The aim of the document was that in case a state has this kind of needs time to decide whether to join India or Pakistan, the state will be given time. And in the meanwhile, whatever is the existing relationship between future dominions and the state will continue. Basically, like J&K, the Srinagar part of J&K, Kashmir part of J&K was solely dependent on Pakistan. The only motorable road ran from via Muzaffarabad from Pakistan into Kashmir Valley. So the logistics, even salt, not to talk about ammunition and other things, everything came from that route. Similarly, Jammu was dependent on Sialkot. Poonch Mirpur area was depending on the link which ran through Mirpur. So just to make sure that public doesn't suffer in case there's a delay in the decision, this clause was inserted. Now, you'll be interested to know, sir, on 31st July, Maharaja, though historians have been blaming him for many things, he sent his deputy PM, Mr. Batra, to Delhi to start the negotiations with Government of India, future Government of India, so that state could merge with India. The reason behind such a thought was that J&K state had 70% Muslim majority population, 60% of them being Sunnis. Maharaja, in his wisdom, had the thought that in case the state goes to Pakistan, while 60% of population will still be protected or will be looked after, 40% of population will have some issues which history later on proved that he was right. Whereas going to secular India was, one thing was assured that whether you are a Hindu, Muslim, or whatever religion or caste or creed you belong to, the state will look after you. And that's what is our ethos we carry along much before, of course, independence happened. That's been part of our culture. So keeping that in mind, when the negotiations were offered to Delhi, it was not taken up. The offer was not taken up. And the reason given was that Mr. Sheikh Muhammad Abdullah, who was that time upcoming leader from Kashmir Valley, unless until he comes on board and he says or supports what Maharaja was offering to India, the negotiation will not start. So that's how the whole thing got delayed, sir. So on 12th of August, 3 days before independence, Maharaja offered standstill agreement to both the future nations, India and Pakistan. Pakistan signed it. For reasons not known today, India didn't sign. It was never discussed. So we landed up in a situation a bit later, like you said, where events happened when people were sacked, people were removed, and finally Pakistan, violating all international norms, understanding, invaded the state in the month of October. Of course, we'll speak about it. What date was the actual date of invasion? So this is an instrument which could have probably, if honored by both the countries, probably would have saved the situation and things would have been different.
Thank you, Ajay. Thank you very much. Like you alluded to, there are various parts of J&K which everybody is not quite familiar with. Each one is culturally diverse. There's language, there's religion, and there's culture. So one you said was Jammu, the other Punch, Mirpur, the third is the Valley, the fourth is Gilgit-Baltistan, and the fifth, of course, being Ladakh. So there are 5 distinct regions in this state. Now, to tell us something about the area of Gilgit-Baltistan and the role of Major Brown and the treachery over there, may I request Brigadier Rajinder to throw some light on this?
Good morning, everyone. Gilgit-Baltistan, even nowadays, not too many people are very clear about it. At that time of independence, the connection was people used to move from Srinagar to Bandipur, across the Razdan Pass, Minimag, Buzil Pass, Astor, Bunji, and then Gilgit. A very long trek. Airfield had been in operation, short runway since 1932, but that was only restricted flights. The British, seeing the strategic geo-importance of the place, had discussed with the Maharaja and taken Gilgit on lease for 60 years in 1935. However, as independence neared, there were various reasons that they felt rather than retaining the agency, they preferred to hand it back and connive with Pakistan to ensure that interests were protected. However, keeping in mind that that Kashmir may not secede to Pakistan, they also kept the option open that if it joined India, then a certain Operation Datta Khel, which had started much earlier, was to be executed. Now, this is one operation hardly anybody knows about. The planning goes quite a few years back. The strategic interests of the area had been enunciated by the British a number of times. Lord Ismay, the military governor to Churchill, had also made it clear. George Cunningham had been brought in for his third tenure as the governor of Northwest Frontier Province on the specific request of Jinnah. There was a political agent at Gilgit, Colonel Bacon. He had been stationed there, and apart from other interests, what is very little known is that one of the secret tasks was to monitor the Russian mining of high-grade uranium in the Kashgar and the Altai mountain region area. But this hardly anybody was aware of, and this was a secret task. The Chinese Turkestan, erstwhile Chinese Turkestan area was very important from that aspect. The British had a consulate in Kashgar since 1890 onwards. And the Gilgit agency was also a very old one. Now, as coming to the role of Major Brown, he was the adjutant of the Gilgit Scouts in 1943. After serving a few years there, he had moved to Chilas, and in 1946, Waziristan with the Tochi Scouts. However, during his time, he had built up a rapport with the locals. Now, most of the troops were locals out there, and keeping this in mind, he was approached by Colonel Bacon in Peshawar to volunteer to join the Gilgit Scouts again. Now, volunteer is a loose term, it was planned. As part of the planning, he accepted. He was flown in, and July he took over as the commandant of the scouts. Now, when the Gilgit agency was handed back, Brigadier Ghansar Singh and General Scott, who was the chief of staff, who was in charge of the defense forces in Srinagar, they reached on 30th July to Gilgit. 31st July, Brigadier Ghansar Singh took over as the governor, and Scott and Colonel Bacon flew out on the 31st. In the next 2 months, Major Brown quietly kept inciting the local troops with the basic aspect that this is purely a Muslim majority area, and it would be a great folly if the Maharaja were not to join Pakistan. Now, this continued once the tribal invasion started in the Kashmir Valley, initially in the Punch side, then the Kashmir Valley, and the Maharaja ceded to India. Then the main portion of Operation Datta Khel went into play. On the night 1st, 2nd November, the governor's residence was surrounded by Major Brown and about 100 odd troops of the Gilgit Scouts. Brigadier Ghansar Singh, hearing some noise, he was there, his orderly and driver, only 3 of them in his hut. As the tribals approached, entered the gate and were about to enter the house, he opened fire. The Gilgit Scouts had even for some time started firing with a MMG, but on Major Brown's orders that was stopped. Early morning, 3 non-Muslims were sent to Brigadier Ghansar Singh, saying that if he did not surrender, he and his companions would be slaughtered, and it would not fare well for the non-Muslims of the Gilgit region. He was blackmailed and forced into surrendering. On 3rd of November, the Pakistani flag was raised by Major Brown in that area. A provincial government was formed. You can imagine heading the provincial government was an ex-Subedar, Rias, and most of the members were captains and lieutenants and Subedars of the Gilgit Scouts. Brigadier Ghansar Singh was forced to hand over to the provincial scouts. A telegram was sent to Pakistan by Major Brown stating that the Gilgit region had ceded to Pakistan. The only link with the outside world was through transmitter and a radio station, both British. Somehow these were bought by Pakistan. It apparently was so connived. Now, the Major Brown has written a very interesting memoir, which is not readily available, in which he claims that he took this action to keep the interests of the locals in mind so that they do not suffer when the region joins India.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Ajay, can you briefly tell us, Brigadier Rajendra alluded to some date. There's a lot of discussion going on about the actual dates of the various commencement of activities in the valley. When did these hostilities commence from Pakistan?
Right, sir. This was a hot topic about a month back. People are luckily revisiting the history, sir. The date which is normally accepted is 22nd of October, when Pakistan, the tribals from Pakistan invaded Kashmir Valley via Muzaffarabad. But much before that, sir, on the night of 8th and 9th October, the invasion of J&K had started at a place called Avanpatan, which happens to be in Punch. Interestingly, when they, in the month of September, 1st September onwards, seeing the kind of, like you mentioned, the confusion which people thought was there in Maharaja's mind, cross-border raids have started. Raiders would come, loot cattle, pick up ladies, women, kids, and go back. And it was happening all across from Kathua, Jammu, Bimbar, and right up to Mirpur. I'm not counting that as a invasion because those were raids. They used to come and go back. But on the 9th, 8th, and 9th, when they came, 9th October when they came, they took Avanpatan. They captured the small platoon locality there, being manned by Gurkha troops or state forces. They took few prisoners, and others managed to escape. Thereafter, next day they came and took a place called Sensa. So the first instance when Pakistani backed tribals, also being led by Pakistani regulars, when they crossed over and sat down and never went back, happened on 8th and 9th October. So that's how that's the actual date when state was invaded for the first time.
Thank you, Ajay. Thank you. Pankaj, can you just throw some light on the siege of and the conflict in Punch? Because that formed a very major part of this whole thing.
Yes, sir, you're absolutely right. The siege of Poonj is a very remarkable story. There are many reasons why it is so remarkable. The first reason is, of course, that it was one of the longest siege in the history of the Indian Army. The siege lasted for one full year, from almost 21st November 47 till 20th November 48, when Poonch was finally liberated, and possibly one of the longest sieges in the world. The second reason why Poonch is so remarkable is the situation that had developed there. Like Colonel Raina said, that the infiltration had started long before. In early October, tribals were already there. And by the time Colonel Preetham, who had been tasked from Uri to advance to Poonch to help the garrison over there, he reached Poonch, it was almost 21st of November. So by this time, almost 3,000-4,000 hostile tribals were present in the surrounding hills overlooking Poonch. And by that time, Mirpur, Kotli, all these were very, very badly affected. And when Colonel Preetham landed in Poonch, he had just about 400 plus of his own troops. And there were about 1,400 of the state troops of the JNK forces in Poonch at that time. So with about 1,800 troops at his command, and the hostiles were almost double that number. The other reason why it was so critical was that there were over 40,000 refugees in Poonch who had come from the surrounding towns of Mirpur, Kotli, Jhangar, and they were sick among them, old people among them. They were panicky, they were fear-ridden, and this entire population added to the 10,000 residents of Poonch was a cluster of almost 50,000 people he had to defend, protect basically from the hostiles. Otherwise, they would have had the same fate what had happened in the other towns. And they hardly had food. They had rations for just about a week. They were low on ammunition, and the siege was all around them. So that was the situation there. The third reason why Poonch was so remarkable was what the Indian Air Force succeeded in doing during that 1 year. They built an air bridge of sorts on a makeshift airfield in Poonch. And they sustained Poonch for 1 year with a constant fly in and fly out of aircrafts. And at the peak in the month of March, for example, in March 48, there were almost 20 flights a day, every day, 600 flights during the month coming in with supplies and going out with refugees. So this was again one of the most remarkable feats due to people like Baba Meher Singh, Air Commodore Meher Singh, who landed a Dakota first over there and improvised so many things like converting a Dakota into a bomber and actually bombing from a Dakota 250-pound bombs, and things like that. And the fourth reason why Poonch became remarkable was that when it was liberated, the Indian Army carried out a very fantastic maneuver under Operation Ranjit, wherein they misled the enemy as to what their target was. Because the enemy had higher concentration of numbers, and they could have easily prevented the Indian forces from reaching Poonch. So it was very essential to have a deceptive maneuver, and Operation Ranjit was carried out as part of Operation Easy. And a place called Pir Badeshar was targeted to mislead the enemy into thinking that they were going towards Kotli. And instead it was towards Poonch, and they managed to reach there, and the link up was complete. And finally Poonch was liberated. So for many, many reasons, this deserves a lot of study for the future army people, and it's a remarkable story.
Thank you, Pankaj. That was wonderful. And we look forward to hearing more about Brigadier Preetham a little later in this thing. Brigadier Rajendra sir, can I ask you something about Zojila? What happened over there when the tanks of 7th Cavalry also moved in there? And Ladakh, can you tell us something about the siege of Ladakh and Zojila?
Okay. Now, as far as Zojila goes and Ladakh, we have to keep in mind they are linked with Skardu. Now, Skardu is a entire different chapter by itself, but I'll just say that when the siege of Skardu was there, Zojila to Kargil was in hands of Indian troops, or rather the state forces. Now, Zojila, at a certain point of time, the enemy captured Kargil on 10th of May and infiltrated onwards towards Dras, and elements had reached Zojila. Now, Zojila being the gateway to Ladakh, it effectively cut off further movement of troops. But however, in Ladakh per se, November onwards, it was felt that after the forces had moved to Skardu from Ladakh, that one needed to build up forces in Ladakh. A strong column under Major Prithvi Chand was sent out in the winters, which reached Leh. It was followed later by a foot column from Manali side by Major Hari Chand. And thereafter, once it was very imperative to build up to sustain Leh. Air Commodore Meher Singh, who was brought out earlier, he landed in Leh with General Thimaiya, the first flight, and troops gradually built up. 28GR was built up in Leh. However, to recapture the places, it was essential to capture Zojila. A few attacks on Zojila failed. Then a brainstorming session was held, and it was decided to improve the track from Baltal to Zojila. The engineers under Major Thangaraj were put into action for that. At the same time, tanks of 7th Cavalry were brought in, and to maintain surprise as also the weight on the bridges, the turret and the hulls were separate, and they were brought in and it was reassembled. Now, the operation for retaking of Zojila kept getting postponed from 20th October onwards. And finally, when it was 1st of November, General Thimaiya, despite the go ahead, by the time the track was built, the tanks of 7th Cavalry, led by Captain Jamwal that time, went up. In fact, the enemy was shocked when the tanks reached Zojila. The enemy bunkers were blasted. And in fact, it is on record that enemy conversations saying that tanks have reached, and their superiors saying, you must be drunk. How can tanks reach out there? That is also a matter of record. One Patiala and other infantry units, in fact, in the next 8-10 days, 1st November onwards, up to Kargil, it took just a span of within a fortnight for the areas up to Kargil to be recaptured. However, that is just one small portion of it. In Leh side, Parab had been flown in September. The rest of his unit, one company under Harichand that come in earlier, the 3 companies had later moved and later also fetched up in September. In the meantime, under Major Prithvi Chand, who had led the initial column, local levies were raised. On the Nubra Valley side, the Nubra scouts, and on the Leh side, the Leh scouts, which later both merged into 7th Jack militia. The enemy was approaching on the Shiok front and via Khalset to the Leh front. Situation was very critical around July, when the enemy was just about 12-13 kilometers from Leh. That is the time when with the limited troops available, that the enemy was held up at this time. In fact, the Nubra scouts which were there, Subedar Bhim Chand, who had been instrumental in training of then a 17-year youngster, Chivang Rinchen, and about 30 odd people in the Nubra Valley, they had held up the enemy that time. There was a certain stage where elements of the Nubra scouts were also pulled in by Major Prithvi Chand to Leh because of the critical situation around Leh in the July-August period. Major Harichand had formed a commando platoon and he was tasked, and he was very successful, like a place 5-6 kilometers from Nemu. They raided and destroyed an enemy 3.7-inch howitzer. He was very instrumental in such raids. Captain Kushal Chand, a cousin of Major Prithvi Chand, he also led raids. In fact, Khalsa Bridge, they had held up the enemy at Khalsa Bridge, he and one more person. Under covering fire by his colleague, he had set fire to the Khalsa Bridge, delaying the enemy for a couple of days. Now, the situation was quite touch and go till Colonel Parab had landed in August with his battalion headquarters and elements of mortars, rest of the battalion having fetched up earlier. Prior to Colonel Parab, however, a company of 24GR had been flown in from Srinagar and they had been pushed west of Leh. The company of Major Harichand, 28GR, was also built up onto this company, and they had been able to ward off very successful attacks towards Leh. When the situation was slightly easing, the militia elements under Chewang Rinchen was sent back on the Nubra Valley, and they also, by carrying out certain raids, succeeded in pushing the enemy back towards Byagdangdo. Now, 7th November onwards was the time when General Thimaiya, coinciding with the successful recapture of Jojila, he told Major Prithvi Chand, he told Colonel Kharab that the offensive now could start, and 7th November onwards, the action against the enemy was started, and the enemy fell back in surprise. The aim was to capture areas up to Marol, but operations could succeed only till about 6-7 kilometers short of Marol. From this side, on the Nubra Valley side, Byagdangdo, a few kilometers beyond, were captured. On the Jojila front, after the recapture of Kargil, the columns from Leh and Kargil linked up, and thereafter progressive operations were planned for Marol. However, keeping the long lines of communication, the build-up of logistics was necessary, and in the meantime, for reasons best known to the authorities, on 1st of January, the ceasefire was adopted, whereas it was possibly a matter of months, 3-4 months, which would have changed the outcome for the later date.
Thank you very much, sir, for your detailed knowledge on this conflict in this part of J&K. Ajay, can I quickly ask you something, because we are a little short of time. Can you tell us something about what happened in the valley and the duplicity of the British?
So, like Brigadier Rajendra has mentioned, British always had their eye on Kashmir. And the reason being, as you also mentioned, sir, the Kashmir was overlooking certain areas to the east, north, and west, that Afghanistan, Russia, and Chinese controlled territory. And in their wisdom, much before World War I, British in their studies had found or kind of finalized their opinion that in case there's a world war going to happen, it will happen in the Pamirs. Pamirs is north of Gilgit. Because Russia was coming down towards south, trying to enter Afghanistan, and was in touch with Maharaja of Kashmir. So British always thought that point of conflict, next conflict would be somewhere in Kashmir, north of Kashmir, Gilgit, that area. So after World War I happened and World War II happened, so Kashmir, when Muslim League was promised that they'll be given a state called Pakistan, because British always had that, you can call it a fear or you call it apprehension, that something is going to happen between Russia and British, the two superpowers that time before World War II, in this area. Now Pakistan, between India and Pakistan, they always knew that Pakistan, a smaller state, would be easy to manage. So they created Pakistan. Now, when Mr. Pankaj Singh was referring to Poonch, one we must remember, sir, from the border of J&K it used to run along Jhelum River in Punch. From there, Rawalpindi is just 50 kilometers away. That meant anybody who was sitting on the east of Jhelum, that is India, in due course of time, will be able to hit Rawalpindi without any much effort, without even crossing the line of that international border. So British, to protect interests of Pakistan and their own interests, they wanted area to the south of Pir Panjal, that complete Punch Mirpur belt to go to Pakistan. At the same time, Pakistan's fixation with Kashmir, of course, is well known. So the situation in Valley was on 22nd October, when they intruded into Muzaffarabad, the 1st Battalion deployed of state forces was Fort Jagrif at a place called Lohara Gali, which was to the west of Muzaffarabad. The company, which was in the show window, actually welcomed those people because the company had been subverted. The subversion in troops of state forces had happened over months. It didn't happen overnight. We must also remember, sir, that the plan to capture Kashmir, called Operation Gulmarg, was signed by the British Chief of Staff, British Commander-in-Chief of Pakistan Army, General Masarvi, on 18th of August, just 4 days after a country gained independence. They had a plan to annex a region of another country. So it is understood, sir, that Pakistan by itself couldn't have evolved that kind of plan in 4 days. So it was done much, much before that. Like Rajendra was saying, it probably started a couple of years before independence, before 47. So as per the plan, 6 Lashkars, that is 6,000 Qabilis, led by Pakistani regulars, intruded Valley via Muzaffarabad. For next 4 days, they were held back by a small force being led by Brigadier Rajendra Singh, who was the Chief of Staff after General Scott. He was the new Chief of Army Staff in state forces, and he had only 100 people. Because bulk of J&K forces were deployed in Punch and Mirpur sector. There's a reason how Punch and those areas could be saved, actually. So these people kept on falling back. They demolished bridge at Uri. They fought battle at Rampur, then Bunyar, then they came down to Baramulla. And 27th morning, at 2 o'clock early in the morning, Brigadier Rajendra Singh actually was badly injured, and he was left with only a handful of troops. And that's the time he gave orders for others to fall back and leave him there. He was never found. His body was never found. So it is taken that he died a few hours later. However, on 27th October, a few hours after death of Brigadier Rajendra Singh, first Qabili vehicle, an open Chevrolet car, carrying a Pakistani regular officer wearing a very bust-ride kind of uniform, it reached Baramulla, and then the plunder of Baramulla began. Luckily, a day prior on 26th, as you mentioned, the instrument of action had been signed, and Indian Army started landing at Srinagar at 9:30 in the morning, and one Sikh under Colonel Rai landed up in Valley. And immediately after landing at Srinagar, instead of waiting for enemy to reach Srinagar, where he knew that he couldn't have controlled 6,000, he could have stopped those 6,000 frenzied men with just 100 odd of his own people, he rushed to Baramulla to take the enemy head on. So on 27th afternoon at about 2 o'clock was a time when one Sikh troops under Colonel Rai and invaders under regular army officers of Pakistan Army, they saw each other at the outskirts of Baramulla. Indian Army officer Colonel Rai was surprised to see, because he was told there's just a few raiders with some axe and bamboos and sticks carrying, and they've come and entered state. When he saw there were machine guns and the mortars being used and the tactics being followed was proper regular army tactics, so he fell back towards Patan, where remnants of state forces were holding, and there's a place where one Sikh then built on. By end of the month, that is around 31st November, raiders have still managed to reach outskirts of Srinagar. They had infiltrated, since the main route was blocked by Indian Army, they went into countryside. They had supporters of Muslim Conference supporting them, whereas National Conference under Sheikh Abdullah was trying to contest them, because by that time Sheikh Abdullah had decided to go along with India. So it was a match between Muslim Conference and National Conference. So there's a battle which was fought outside, just next to airport, Battle of Badgaon, where Major Somnath Sharma was awarded Paramir Chakra posthumously for his bravery. And then on 7th of November, the final battle was fought in Shalatang, where a troop of armored cars of 7 cav surprised enemy by coming from the rear under the guidance of that time Colonel Harbakh Singh, later on Lieutenant General Harbakh Singh, and with one Sikh and Brigadier Pritam's battalion, one para Kumaon, holding in front. And within 20 minutes, the whole thing, the so inflated ego or inflated drama of Pakistan invasion came to an end. there's a
Thank you, Ajay. Thank you very much. Incidentally, Colonel Rai died on 27th October and he was awarded the Mahavir Chakra for the stand he took over there. Now, Pankaj, can you quickly tell us something about Brigadier Pritam Singh? You've written a book of his called Sher Ka Bacha. Can you throw some light on Brigadier Pritam Singh and his remarkable siege of Pune?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, I can. Brigadier Pritam was a remarkable figure, sir. In fact, I'll just hold the book. This is the book we wrote on him. And his story begins when he was posted in World War II in Singapore. And he was captured as a prisoner of war over there. And along with two other officers, Captains Parab and Captain Balbir, I think who later became Colonel Parab, probably Brigadier Rajinder was referring to the same Parab, I'm not sure. But the three of them escaped from Singapore, and over Malay, Thailand, and Burma, over 6 months of time, they trekked back to India, basically walking through jungles and, very, very tough in enemy-held territory through Japan. And for this reason, all three of them were awarded the Military Cross by the British. And they landed back in India. Now, when the 47 operation happened, so Colonel Pritam happened to be in Delhi at that time. And on 29th, possibly October, he was called to the headquarters, army headquarters, where he learned about what is happening. And after one Sikh, one Para Kumaon became the second battalion to be airlifted to Kashmir. And he was leading that. The battalion was actually under the command of a British officer, Colonel G.B. Beer, and there was a decision taken that British officer cannot head a battalion that is going into conflict over there in J&K. And so overnight, the command was given to Colonel Pritam. And the next morning, he rushed to Srinagar. And he was initially put behind one Sikh. But on 7th November, when the strategic Shalatang battle was fought, One Kumaon was given the go-ahead to attack, and Brigadier Pritam played a very heroic role on the battlefield in Shalatang, and his contribution to that battle is immense, which liberated Srinagar at that point in time. So from there, the troops had pursued the fleeing raiders up to Uri, and around 20th of November, that's almost some days, 13 days after Shalatang, they were given orders to relieve the garrison at Poonch. So that's when Colonel Pritam started off from Uri to Poonch. And unfortunately, there was a bridge which had been blown up just 3 kilometers out of Uri. And the battalion got held up. It was a convoy of over 200 vehicles. And they were trying to negotiate the riverbed, and they were held up for a long while. And it was late afternoon by the time the battalion could proceed. And the rear of the battalion was even further delayed, some 20 odd vehicles, and the rear was held up while the main battalion went ahead towards the Poonch side. And at night, the raiders attacked the rear, and they destroyed the convoy, and there were casualties of One Kumaon in that, while Brigadier Pritam had proceeded onwards to Poonch. And that's the reason why the link to Uri was later cut off because of this attack, and the decision was taken to withdraw and fall back to Uri after that. So while Colonel Pritam landed, he had just about 400 troops with him, like I mentioned earlier, and 1,400 state troops were there. And once in Poonch, and once he realized the gravity of the situation, the total number of refugees and everything, the main thing was that everybody was very demoralized. It was a very, very demoralized situation in Poonch, and people were worried, tense. And Brigadier Pritam took charge, and he immediately set about rallying the forces. He pushed his men to set up the pickets. He started building the defense of Poonch, and he started raising militia battalions out of the civilians over there. He raised almost 2 battalions of the able-bodied people who were available in the civilians to defend Poonch over there. The second major aspect of his was he did not play a defensive strategy at all. He was always on the offensive for 2 reasons. One was, of course, food. They had to foray into enemy territory to gather grains to keep the population fed at that time, and that was something that he did remarkably. And the second was that they were always expanding their pickets. They were always taking higher ground from the enemy, always on the offensive, not letting the enemy rest. And throughout December, January, February, March, there were so many raids conducted by him and so many features which they tried to take. Of course, there were some setbacks. They did lose some and they had to give up, but they were constantly, defending Poonch very aggressively. And his effort to build the airfield in Poonch between the Betar Nala and the town of Poonch, where the Dakotas could land, that was also done with civilian help under enemy fire. The airport was always exposed, that makeshift airfield, and the enemy was constantly firing on them, but still they managed to build the airfield. And he personally led many actions from the front. And in fact, in General Palit's account, he was at that time Colonel Palit commanding 319 GR in Poonch. There was a grenade attack in which Colonel Palit was badly injured. And he writes that Pritam held his hand down the valley when bringing him down on the mule to save him. And then he was airlifted subsequently out of Poonch. So Pritam's character is a remarkable character. He's a great hero, which has not got the recognition that he deserves. And but yes, his character saved Poonch, and he's known as the Sher Bacha there, the local.
Yes, Pankaj, thank you very much. We read
welcome,
that
sir.
book, Sher Ka Bacha, so remarkable.
Yes,
You know, we can carry on discussing various other aspects of J&K. There's the significance of water, how water plays a role over here, the siege of Skardu. But we are running out of time, and I can see there are lots of questions from lots of students at the moment. So, you know, we've got 15 minutes left now. So the first student is from Vidya Devi Jindal School, Hisar. So, Kumkum Suneja, are you on line?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Kumkum.
Thank you so much, sir. A very good morning to everyone. I am Kumkum Suneja from Vidya Devi Jindal School, and my question is for Colonel Ajay Raina, sir. Sir, why was the 1947-48 war always referred to as the J&K Ops? Also, why was the role of state forces never given their due despite having performed extremely well under the circumstances?
Good morning, Kumkum. Your questions have two parts. And the first part is, it was never declared as a war. You know, if you look at the larger picture, it was a game of chess being played by Britishers. It was all British ploy. So you see, all three chiefs of Air Force, Navy, and Army in India and Pakistan, all six were British officers, and commander-in-chief of both the countries were a British officer. So they always did what they wanted to do. They knew when to tell people to stop, troops to stop, when Indian troops were told not to go beyond certain things, when Pakistani were held back at certain points. It was all played like a chess. At the same time, because partition had just happened, in army, British Indian Army was getting divided. So non-Muslim troops who were deployed in Pakistan, they were moving back to India as per the agreement. And many Muslim volunteers, not everybody, all Muslims went to Pakistan. Those who wanted to go to Pakistan, they were shifting back to Pakistan. So there was no war to the south of J&K state. There were riots. We all know 1 million people died in Punjab, but officially two countries are not at war. So it is not referred to as war in that context, and it is generally called as conflict. Second part, the state forces. State forces, I'll not say people were against state forces. They did a wonderful job. In my books, I've written 5 books on role of state forces and everybody else in 47, 48. Actually, what had happened before Indian Army landed up there, nobody knew what had happened, who had fought where. People had no time to record their history. There was no time to make TikTok videos and share the world. People were fighting in isolation. 600-mile frontage, 12,000 troops deployed in small pockets. So whatever people wrote, Indian Army officers, General Sain is one of them who wrote a beautiful book on operations. He wrote what he saw after he landed, whereas most of the role played by state forces had almost got over before arrival of Indian Army. But they saved what Brigadier Pritam was saying, Mr. Pankaj was saying, when Brigadier Pritam reached Poonch, there were 1,200 odd state forces. There were forces in Skardu, there were forces in Leh. So these people held back. And when Indian Army came, they gave them the launch pad or firm base to operate and save the state.
Thank you, Ajay.
Thank you, sir.
The next question we have is from the Assam Valley School.
So, good morning, everyone. My name is Shravan Bordhakur, and I'm from the Assam Valley School, and my question is for Brigadier Rajendra Singh. Sir, Pandit Nehru taking the matter to the UN is believed to be because of Mountbatten. The role of the British has never really been understood in the context of Jammu and Kashmir. So how involved were they really, sir?
I think a reasonable portion has already been covered. However, I would like to confirm that it was Nehru was guided by Mountbatten in most of the issues, and backseat driving was done by the British. As Colonel Ryan brought out, that all Army, Navy, Air Force chiefs on either side were British officers, and Field Marshal Auchinleck was the overall in charge out here, and the Viceroy was Mountbatten. Now, as I brought out earlier, they were involved in Operation Dattakhel, which was long-term planning, which is how the Gilgit Agency had been given back with the pre-plan that it would never revert to India. Similarly, as Colonel Ryan brought out, a country gains independence and within 4 days of operations, orders are issued for the Operation Gulmarg. It is not possible. Such things take a few months, if not more, to plan. So their duplicity has existed all along. In fact, one thing which I didn't mention earlier, Major Brown, for his Gilgit role, while technically he had resigned from service, but in the honors list by the Queen, he was awarded the MBE in 1948, and reasons are not disclosed. But the reason was his role in Gilgit. It was handed over on a plate. Similarly, the raiders which had come in, the governor of the Northwest Frontier Province was George Cunningham, who had been specifically requested to come for his third tenure. He had a major hand in organizing or telling the local chieftains to organize the Lashkars. In fact, he has gone out of the way to tell the district collectors in that region to ignore the gathering of the Lashkars. So whichever way you see, the British had a hand in everything. Now the Skardu held out for 6 months plus. Colonel Sher Jang Thapa. But at the end, what happened? That the British prohibited the use of offensive air power. Skardu got very limited air support in terms of food being dropped, half of which went to the tribals because it drifted away. But there was a hill feature overlooking the Skardu fort, which was higher. It could have been blasted with offensive air action. Somehow it was not permitted. The air chief had advised against it. So in all aspects of the conflict, you will see the British hand behind. In fact, offensive operations were not permitted after July. So all the operations that time, the Pakistanis ignored that. The Indians adhered to it in a reasonable manner, except for certain operations called defensive operations. And under guise of that, the link up with Punch took place. You know, the holding out beyond Tithwal, some elements had to fall back, but this was a ploy of the British. So luckily, with the passage of time, more and more details come out. Some records do get declassified, but it was a sinister ploy right from the word go.
Thank you, sir. We now have a question from Vidya Niketan Birla Public School. Yuvansh Negi, are you online?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Yuvansh.
Good morning, sir. My name is Yuvansh Singh Negi, and I'm from Birla Public School, Pilani. So my question is for Mr. Pankaj Singh. So my question is, Poonch is separated from Uri by the Hajipir Bulge. So what is your comment on returning the strategic area to Pakistan in 1965?
Returning Hajipur was definitely a mistake. So much so that even Major Dayal, who later became General Dayal, who had captured Hajipir for India in 1965, said so in so many words. He said that it was a big strategic mistake that we made and that our people can't read maps. This is what he said. The reason is that Hajipir provided the crucial link between Uri and Poonch onwards to Jammu, and that used to be the main route for all the commercial traffic and the civilian traffic that used to operate between Srinagar and Poonch and onwards to Jammu. So with the losing the Hajipir, the loss of Hajipir Bulge to Pakistan, we lost the road link, which would have shortened the distance by almost 200 kilometers. The second thing was that, which we did not realize initially, but later on it came to our notice, that Pakistan used the Bulge to infiltrate into Kashmir Valley, because they had access to the gullies over the Pir Panjal, and they could easily have their people move in. So that has become the main point of infiltration into the Poonch Rajouri sector, also into the valley also, and that is a permanent pain point for India. So for these reasons, it was a definite strategic mistake to have lost the Haji Pir Bulge and not have recaptured it when the opportunity was there in 71.
Thank you, Pankaj. Thank you very much. The
Thank you so
next
much, sir.
question is from Kittur Rani Chinmana School, and that's Rakshita Goragori.
Good morning. This is Rashmi from Hittu Science School. My question is for Colonel Raina. So, your comment on the role played by Sheikh Abdullah. His family continues to be key players in Jammu and Kashmir.
Okay. When the opening remarks were made by General Jagatbir, he referred to nationalism, the feeling of nationalism during 1947-48. In case of Sheikh Abdullah, I would say he had a strong surge of sub-nationalism. Sheikh Abdullah's concept of nationalism was independent Kashmir. In fact, not many writers have written about it. First message from Sheikh Abdullah after he was released by Maharaja in the month of September was to Mr. Jinnah in Pakistan. He sent his envoy, Mr. Sadiq, to Jinnah and told him, Kashmir is ready to merge with Pakistan if Mr. Jinnah allows Mr. Sheikh Abdullah to continue as the chief of Kashmiri Muslims in Pakistan. Now, Mr. Jinnah was a very secular kind of a person. He didn't pay any heed. He said, no. If J&K comes to Pakistan, there will be one part of Pakistan like any other part. There will be no local chief or anything of that kind. So Sheikh Abdullah had no option but to then look towards other friend who was Pandit Nehru, who was very close to Sheikh Abdullah. So Sheikh Abdullah actually, if you look at the history critically, he played on Pandit Nehru's mind. Pandit Nehru, like Brigadier Jindra was saying, Mountbatten was one factor before independence who guided or misguided him. And thereafter, as the events unfolded over years, and you speaking about family, his son and grandson who are still active in politics in J&K, in that chain of events, Mr. Pandit Nehru got misguided or misled by Sheikh Abdullah. So he was a very clever, shrewd politician who, having failed to achieve independence, tried to get something very close to independence by calling it autonomy. Getting 370 inserted, backdoor 335 section, this is all deeds of Sheikh Abdullah. Why Pandit Nehru allowed it, that is another part of debate, which is of course not today's topic. But yes, you're right, they have an important role, and state and the country and armed forces who are bearing the brunt today, the result is what Mr. Sheikh did during 47, after 47, and the family continues to do today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ajay. Thank you. And the last question we have is from Rinchin Norbu from Welham Boys School, the host school.
Good morning, sirs. I'm Rinchin Norbu from the Welham Boys School. My question is for Mr. Pankaj Singh. Sir, without Kashmir, Jinnah is quoted as saying that he had got a moth-eaten Pakistan. So in your opinion, how devastating would it have been for India if Kashmir, including the regions of Jammu and Ladakh, had actually gone to Kashmir and had actually gone to Pakistan in the first place?
When the independence occurred, how Pakistan would have treated India was still an open question. But subsequent events have very clearly established that Pakistan became a hostile nation to India. So if today we were to speculate on that, it is very clear that the loss of Kashmir to Pakistan would have been detrimental to India's interest. The strategic importance of Kashmir has already been discussed. I will not repeat that. Its connectivity between China and the Central Asian republics and Pakistan anyway makes it a very strategic location, and nations all across the world have been playing politics over there, the great Himalayan game, etc. The other crucial reason is the water, the river, Indus river system, and the waters which flow to the plains, both for Pakistan and for India. And water has been weaponized today. You're aware of that, that water can be used as a weapon, dams can be used as a weapon. So looking at the fact that Kashmir would have been hostile, Pakistan would have been hostile to India, the loss of Kashmir would have been very, very detrimental to India's interest. And that's the reason India protects it and values it so much.
Thank you very much, Pankaj. That was superb. At the end, all that is left for me is to thank all the panelists for your detailed comments and your insight into this region, which is still one of the most focused regions in our country. And you know, all of you know, the LOC is still active. There's infiltration going on. There's a proxy war over there. So you've thrown light on a very crucial period of its history, 1947, 1948. Thank you very much for your participation.
Thank you, sir. Thank you,
sir.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, sir. This brings us to the end of the 4th session. We will see you at 12 noon for the 5th session, post-US election, the Quad.